Aloha ua tua hine, mai lua hinea I Waikiki, ia I ke haukani, hani no na leo, e o kamaina, aina aloha e, manoa e. Aloha mai kako. Thank you so much for joining us. Katie, could you please advance to the next slide? Thank you. So before we get going, we wanted to say that we're going to be recording this event just to let you folks know. And when the event is called, we'll upload it to the Hawaii Sea Grant YouTube so you can share it with other folks that haven't been over here. We also wanted to say that this webinar is a collaborative effort of the Sea Grant Traditional and Local Knowledge Community of Practice and the Hawaii Sea Grant Ulani'ike Center of Excellence and the National Center for Atmospheric Research. This is actually part of an ongoing series of events from the Sea Grant Traditional and Local Knowledge Community of Practice, and we have funding support from the National Sea Grant Office for this. So at the end of this webinar, we'll provide you with a link if you're interested in signing up for that additional events in this series from the Sea Grant Traditional and Local Knowledge Community of Practice. Next slide, please. So typically, if we were in person, we would present all of the presenters with some lei to welcome them to this place and to thank them for coming. So before we do that, I'm going to do one more oli just to welcome everybody. This is called Kele Maila. It's usually what I would do if I were giving somebody a lei. But for now, I'm going to offer the gift of my voice instead of the gift of some beautiful flowers. Kelehi mai lau kaula I ke kaia, ke malama lama o ni iho ua malie. A malie ua pai ka inu waila, he inu maila na hala una we I ke kai. No na we ka hala, no puna e ka wahine, no ka lua no I kila we ai. So aloha and welcome to all of our panelists. Today we have three wonderful panelists joining us. So I'll be introducing them and reading their bios. So our first panelist today is Kumu Noi Puniwai. Noi Puniwai is from Puna on Hawaii Island, where she and her three children love to huaka'i and learn the mo'olelo of the aina. Dr. Puniwai is an assistant professor at the Kamakakūokalani Center for Hawaiian Studies, where she's passionate about cultivating the next generation of students to mālama aina. Her research interests include ancestral Hawaiian knowledge regarding the aina, coastal ecosystems, cultural geography, seascapes, climate change, and kanaloa. Noi believes that we can use rigor and methodologies of pono science, the foundational wisdom of our kupuna, and our experiential daily practice of aloha aina to awaken responsible action for the future of our Hawaii. Next slide, please. Thank you. So the second panelist joining us is Dr. Dominique David-Chavez. Dominique is an assistant professor of Indigenous Natural Resource Stewardship, working with Colorado State University's Department of Forest and Rangeland Stewardship and the Native Nations Institute at the Udall Center for Studies in Public Policy at the University of Arizona. Dominique leads the Indigenous Land and Data Stewards Interdisciplinary Research Lab, and her research focuses on Indigenous data stewardship, ethics, and research governance in environmental policy and decision-making, developing methods for community-based climate research and resilience in the Caribbean islands, and supporting pathways for decolonizing through Indigenous regeneration and research and teaching and natural resource sciences. Dr. David-Chavez draws from her experiences as a multicultural Caribbean Indigenous Arawak Taino research scientist, mentor, learner, and mother in her scholarship and practice. Next slide, please. And our third panelist is Nick Kawelakai Farrant. Kawelakai was raised in Paumalu, Ko'olauloa, Oahu, and he is an extension agent jointly serving Hawaii Sea Grant and the North Shore Community Land Trust. Kawela is a lifelong resident of the North Shore of Oahu, who has worked with NSCLT in various capacities for the last 8 years, including while undertaking his schooling at the University of Hawaii at Manoa, where he earned dual bachelor's degrees in community planning and Hawaiian language, and a master's of science degree in natural resources and environmental management. Kawela's work currently focuses on implementing resilience initiatives at a 35-acre coastal freshwater wetland restoration site in Waiale'e, Oahu, by refurbishing traditional Kanaka Maoli or Native Hawaiian agricultural and aquacultural infrastructure and initiating community outreach and education projects. Next slide, please. So I'm going to be turning this over to Dr. Diamond Tachera so she can set the context for this webinar and tell us a bit of the mana'o or the thought that guided us in creating this event.
Dr. Sara, it feels so weird when you call me Dr. Diamond.
Yeah.
But thank you. So I feel really honored to have this webinar like use the title of one of the sections of this EOS article I wrote. So to set the context, I wrote an EOS article during my PhD, and it was called Reframing Research to Build Reciprocity. And it really came from my experiences as a graduate student doing community engagement work in Kona on Hawaii Island. I'm not from Kona, I'm from Oahu. And so I had to build relationships and, really introduce myself to these places and to these people. And it was a lot of work. I don't like to use the word burden, but it is a huge burden for a graduate student to take on, especially for an entire project's worth of people to do community engagement. I had a lot of really great mentors during that process, but at the same time, doing your dissertation work and doing all of this relationship building and also relationship maintenance is really hard. It takes a lot of time. And so I wanted to say thank you to all of those people in Kona too, for all of their mana'o that they shared with us and just the energy that they gave us for that work. Next slide, please. So in this EOS article that I wrote, there's 4 main sections, and these are the titles of those sections. I didn't want to go through the whole thing with you in these 10 minutes, but really in that article, I talk about the burden of broader impacts a lot from my perspective as a graduate student. And then I had 3 main calls in this article. One was to have more accountability from funding agencies and even from peers within the institutions on how we represent our institutions and how we engage with communities when we do our field work. Really focusing on what are the best practice guidelines that already exist. So through Hawaii Sea Grant, there is Kulananoi'i, which, through the University of Hawaii, like we should be using this foundation as scientists and researchers. I think it would be great if that was a requirement across all the research that's done at the university, but specifically for those of us who work with communities in Hawaii, I think, why not? It already exists, right? We're not starting from scratch. And then the last thing I really talk about in this article is, we have a standard, or we have this standard we hold ourselves to when we talk about data quality, but why don't we have that kind of standard when we talk about engagement and human interaction? Like, why does that not matter, but the numbers that I put into a data table are more important? So those are really like the 4 main topics of that article. But to really ground us in place, Katie, could you go to the next slide? Since this is a Sea Grant hosted webinar, I wanted to just briefly talk about how the University of Hawaii is pretty unique and special in that we are a land grant, sea grant, and space grant institution. This photo that you're looking at is from 1926. It's an aerial photo of our campus, UH Manoa campus. And that bigger building on the right, I think that's Hawaii Hall. And so in 1926, you can see a lot of the old agriculture that used to exist in Manoa Valley. And, in the article, I talk about how land grant institutions really erase Indigenous people from their lands. And UH is no different. Unfortunately, even in some of the Board of Regents meeting minutes, you can go back and read them. They actually talk about removing Native Hawaiians from this land to build out the university. And when I read that as a graduate student, I was heartbroken. How can I be at an institution that claims to be a Native Hawaiian place of learning when I'm literally reading that we took these people away from their homes? And so from that, and also the experiences that I had, just in the classroom and working with Western trained scientists, it was really hard to get across to other people this burden of broader impacts or broader impact statements or doing broader impact work. And at the end of the day, it comes to what the institution represents. And it's hard to say, but we are a land grant institution. So to ground us in where this conversation ultimately comes from, I just wanted to share this beautiful photo of our old Hawaiʻi. And then, yeah, can you go to the next slide? And so just to share the people and places that I worked with for my dissertation, I am so grateful and humbled and honored to have worked with so many great community members who gave their time and energy to do this work. I think that from all of our collective experiences as panelists and hosts on this panel, building relationships with Indigenous communities, it's substantial labor that often is unpaid. It falls to early career scientists most of the time. And for those of us who are Indigenous, who are working within our own communities, even though I'm not from Kona, every time I would do field work, people would ask, oh, are you related to so-and-so? Right? And so it's not just, it's beyond just doing the research, right? It's your actual family's reputation on the line. So for those of us who are doing work in our own communities, we have a responsibility. It's a kuleana, it's a responsibility, but it's also a right and a privilege to do this work in a Pono way. And I'm very grateful for Noi, who had this class, Pono Science, that I took as a graduate student that ultimately led to the career I have now. But, to have my family's name attached to the work I do, it's more than just a publication, right? So for me, the greatest part of like the outcome of my dissertation, it's really the photos you're looking at. It's really the list of names that you're looking at. It's not the metrics of publications and presentations and whatever else, tenure and promotion is taking into account. For me personally, these are the people and the places that I am grateful for and what I am, honored to have shared. And Pono science, Pono, can someone else say the definition of Pono? I always do so bad, but it's like to do it in a right way, to do it like in a good way, right? Okay, everyone's nodding. Okay, yes, thank you.
Yeah, that's my interpretation as well.
Yeah,
it's like balanced, correct, whatever that means to you.
Yeah, okay, yeah. Thank you for that question, James. And so, yeah, just to go back or go forward, Katie, sorry, in the slides, just, wrapping it up. These are the points that's going to come across in the ES article. Please read it, please share it, but don't read it while the panelists are talking. But yeah, I hope that you feel the love that I have for this place and for this work that I got to do as you read through the article. And I'm so excited to have this conversation with friends right now. So yeah, take it away, Sara.
Hey, mahalo, Dr. Diamond. So yeah, thank you so much for that background. I also wanted to note, I guess, before we get into the panel discussion, that we're talking here from a very Hawaii centered, view. A lot of us that are on this call are from Hawaii. And in particular, I think we're not just focusing on the Indigenous people here, but we tend to have more of a broad understanding of what it means to be Indigenous to place. And so we connect a lot with other folks like Dominique from the continent. And so in this panel, we're going to be talking about Indigenous people's relationship to research and to research institutions, knowing that many of us come from a Kamakakūokalani perspective, but we want to note that there are many other minoritized communities that face similar burdens that also have a distinct relationship with academia that we can't really speak to because that's not our experience. So in this panel, we'll be talking primarily about what it's like to be Indigenous scientists and Indigenous scholars, and also Indigenous community members and folks that work on the ground. And I encourage you to look towards other sources for thinking through, what the other burdens that other minoritized communities face are. Okay, so let's get started with the panel discussion. I guess, yeah, perfect. Thank you so much. So we're going to start with a pretty simple question. I know that I read everyone's bios, but we wanted to ask all of the panelists to introduce themselves in their own words and let us know who you are, what work you do, and what communities or places that you have responsibility to. Maybe we can have Noi start if you don't mind, Kumunoi.
Yep. Thank you. I saw the request. Aloha, everyone. Thanks for kicking us off. Awesome. Dr. Diamond and Dr. Sara. So great to see you guys move along and join the rest of us in this profession. As it said in my bio, I was conceived on the slope of Halema'uma'u. I have lived in the moku of Puna and various ahupua'a, mostly in Ola'a for most of my life. And my children now live with me in Waikahekahiki, where many local families live on Puna, Hawaii. I began in this place as a student, just loving being on the island. I grew up swimming in the pools of Kapoho, which have recently been taken by lava in 2018, hiking in the forest of Ola'a, where I grew up, walking volcano with my father, who was a seismologist, and just being on the Aina, giving me that sense of place. That sense of place really helped me understand the communities I work with aren't always just from a specific physicality place, but the people who are brought together for certain passions, such as canoe paddling. I love canoe paddling. My dad has learned the art of canoe carving. My children are super competitive paddlers at this time. So that community of paddlers is another community that you work with, right? The communities of place are another. And then the communities of Aina are other places. So the island of Kaho'olawe has been super instrumental in helping me connect to Aina and my place in science, knowing that what I want to do is have an impact on the health and abundance of Hawaii, of our Aina, of the world. And to do that, you need to work in places, in specific places. And so I try through my classes and my students, more importantly than my research, through the students and through my classes, I help places. So we've chosen Kaho'olawe as one of those places that can draw you in, can heal you as you heal the Aina. I choose projects that the communities are interested in and the places that are asking for kokua, that are asking for help in the research that they're doing. And so my research is constantly changing because it's dependent on the responsibility I have to those who are asking for help. And so that is kind of the work that I do, is helping and using the universities and the everything that's available to us, working in a research institution to help the people and places that I love. So welcome. I'll pass it off.
I guess, Dominique, do you want to go next?
Yeah, thank you. So Mabrika, or welcome. Dominique Aita Inaru David-Chavez Diri. Orike Narawak Hiwaro Taino Daka Hahum Guaitiao. And so that's our Indigenous Island Arawakan or Native Caribbean language. I'm sharing with you just to greet you and let you know who I am and let you know who our community is, and also to thank you in a way as extended relatives. And because that's how I think of you, these people coming together. And I only just met Kawela. I fangirled out Noe at a Rising Voices gathering a few years back, but I already deeply admire and respect all of your work. And I love this coconut wireless inter-island connection we're having right now. I'm really grateful to be part of this discussion. And I'm so grateful for your work, Diamond and Sara. This generation just very inspired by the way that you're bringing us together, even the way you welcomed us in. And, you know, in my understanding, learning Pono, I feel like you welcomed us in a very Pono way, and the way that you started us off too. And just outstanding Indigenous excellence with this generation. So thank you. And Diamond, thank you for your work, because I know it took an effort to make that, you know, turn that into a publication, but you really articulated what so many of us were experiencing. And I've just been sharing this article on probably a weekly basis as required reading when people reach out to me, you know, and for my colleagues and folks that want to partner. So I hope it's okay. I just took a moment to share a little bit about that too. But in terms of who I am in my places, like I said, I'm a multicultural person. My indigeneity is rooted in the Caribbean, in Boriquen, or an island that you might know as the US territory of Puerto Rico, which is where my mom's born. And I'm the first generation, born and raised away from the island. And so my upbringing has also been shaped by a lot of communities, a lot of other Native communities, and then also by my own community and culture, like as taught and raised through me by my mother. So I definitely feel a sense of accountability and rootedness in those places and in our sister island communities in the Caribbean. But also, yeah, so many places have raised and cared for me. So I also feel accountability to those places where I live and responsibility. And now I'm in my husband's home community. I'm about as far from the ocean as I could be, which love will take you crazy places. But I'm also at the headwaters, so I know we still have that connection. I'm in the Front Range of Colorado. So where I teach and learn now are Ute, Cheyenne, and Arapaho homelands, and a lot of other tribal nations and communities come through here and call this place home or have a connection as a gathering place and a place of ceremony and a place of trade. All our communities have really traded for a long time and had connections for a long time prior to the borders we have today. So I do feel a sense of connection and in many places. And then in terms of the work I do, kind of that history and upbringing has shaped me to be where I am, because when you're growing up and you're learning, like your sciences, your knowledges, all that, your values being passed down to you, and bits of your history, what we're able to learn about when you enter, for me, the public settler colonial academic systems, it's very apparent when it's not present. And that erasure and invisibility has just been something whether I was thinking about it or not, have always been navigating. And that really led me to what I'm doing now. I never could have seen myself necessarily doing this back in the day, just being first generation, in higher education. So, but I quickly realized that it was important to be in this space, particularly in the sciences in this case too, and really making a space where we can honor our Indigenous knowledges and the values systems they're embedded within, our languages, our contributions to these fields that have often gone unrecognized, and also to bring that into all of the innovative and creative ways that we're, re-envisioning how we can care for the land, how we can care for each other, and how we can prepare for the future and many of the changes that we're experiencing that we know are accelerating in some ways. So that's really how the Indigenous Land and Data Storage Lab, as we've dubbed ourselves, was born. And our department, Home, Forest, and Rangeland Stewardship, we're such an interdisciplinary or undisciplinary department or lab. We could have been housed a lot of places, but they had done some groundwork here around really engaging in the deeper work, I think, like the roots of why we have diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. Like, what are the roots of that? What are the sort of some of the reconciliation, truth and reconciliation work, what you might call it. So that's why I'm in this departmental home. And I think also just like who I hold accountability to is kind of this intergenerational responsibility that also shapes where I put my energy. Because I'm a mother, I have 3 young children, and I think about it's like this direct sacred responsibility that I hold accountability to, taking care of things for them the way folks did for me to be able to be here. So just being a good relative and ancestor kind of guides me where I need to spend my energy, where I need to pick up skills here and there, and how to do my own work in a good way. Always thinking about that responsibility to those generations. And I like Noe's description of those different communities. So I guess also in terms of communities, I'm part of the community of what my mentor, Stephanie Russo-Carroll, calls data warriors, or just like these kind of this geeky side of the work that we do sometimes quietly, sometimes keeping under the radar, but really, you know, putting our sciences to work in ways to show kind of the unseen things we're forced to see, but things that others may not necessarily see, if that makes sense. So yeah, I think I'll just pass it on from here.
Mahalo.
Hello, Dominique. Hello, mai kako, mai kapi'ina kalai hai ai hiki ka kona velona I ka mole o lehua a hiki hoa ku ina kihi e hau ka ho nua ko lohe ana mai na kihi apa o ka ho nua. Aloha mai kako o wauno o Kawelakai Farrant no paumalu mai au. Aloha everyone. My name is Kawelakai Farrant. I was born and raised in the Ahupua'a, or the land division of Paumalu, on the north shore of the island of Oahu. I've spent my whole life living here. I still live here to this day. And it's really become, you know, I've developed a deep love for this place. It's become the foundation of my academic career, my, you know, professional career, my involvement in my community. My kind of relationship to place and in my life. I live here, you know, very much rooted in the Indigenous culture, but I think worth noting the nuance of my relationship to this place is in part because of my father, who is a settler from California, was enticed to move here due to the famous waves and the surfing that this place is known for. It's become a big part of my life, our family's life. And he was fortunate to meet my mother, who is Kanaka Maoli, born and raised in Kailua, which is on the east side of Oahu, and her family goes back there for generations. But it's interesting to note that, you know, my family has, you know, a diverse and complex relationship to place, and yet this is my home. This is the place that raised me. This is the, you know, the place that I know best. And it's a place that I've come to love and come to devote my career to through various avenues. But yet it has come, you know, through multiple, I guess, parents and multiple reasons that are, I guess, part of my task to figure out and talk about and make sense of through the course of my life and the other people who are in similar situations in our communities. So I went to to go way back. I did my schooling at Kamehameha schools, grade school, which is an institution, you know, that is meant to serve Hawaiian children of Hawaiian ancestry, provide like a, you know, private school education. And I credit a lot of my, you know, early kind of, I guess, opportunities to having, you know, that opportunity, and particularly having well-intentioned mentors who, you know, recognize the importance of you know, academics, but also, you know, cultural, I guess, heritage and cultural, practice. And that influenced me to continue on my education at UH Manoa at home, continuing on and furthering my knowledge, which was not great, and, you know, still always learning, but was very much premature at the time of entering college as an undergraduate, and had the opportunity to enter into Olelo Hawaiʻi, or Hawaiian language. I had the opportunity to have many more influential Kanaka Oiwi, Native Hawaiian mentors, professors who guided me along the way. And at that time, while I was in college pursuing Olelo Hawaiʻi and community planning, got back involved in my home community on the North Shore of Oahu with this group called North Shore Community Land Trust, which works to preserve land on the North Shore through transactions and purchasing, but also more recently through hands-on restoration of the land. So getting involved with them early on in my undergraduate years was really another blessing, another opportunity to be able to build upon an existing framework, build upon, have mentors who cared deeply about this place, and have an ability to just learn from those people, learn from those opportunities, and have a pathway to tie that back into my academic work, and that, you know, further inspired me to pursue this this love for this place, which is behind me, which is Waiale'e, which is about 2 miles from the place that I mentioned where I was raised, which is Paumalu. Waiale'e is just a little bit further down the road. It was used for many years as owned by the University of Hawaii and used as a livestock research station. So part of that land grant, I guess, institutional history. That use went from the 1960s, and then by the early 2000s, it started to decline. And so by the 2010s, when it was really, you know, very little going on there, was when I was starting to get involved with the North Shore Community Land Trust. My mentors were kind of engaging with the university to find out what the plans for the site were. And then that's when it sparked my interest in learning more about the place, the cultural history of the place, the mo'olelo, the historical food systems and resource management systems that were implemented. And that became the focus of my master's capstone project, really diving into the primary sources of, you know, historical land records, Olelo Hawaiʻi newspaper articles, and, you know, interdisciplinary sources, also looking at what was on the land today, to really get a sense of, essentially put together a resource assessment and a picture of what was and what is, and, you know, to inform what could be. And so, you know, really just, it's been such a pleasure and a journey to get to know this place, to have, like I mentioned, the benefit of all of these mentors and community partners that really help to I guess bring some sort of resolution to this aina, which is now leased to the North Shore Community Land Trust by the University of Hawaii, but also the partnerships within the University of Hawaii are continuing through the Sea Grant College program. My own role has evolved to be, as was mentioned, as an extension agent for the Sea Grant College program in partnership with the North Shore Community Land Trust. So we have this great opportunity to malama this place. Yeah, I guess throughout this conversation, I'll probably be the more optimistic person, because I feel like I've been very fortunate to benefit from a lot of the things that have gone right within attempts to bring Indigenous research to the forefront over the past 10 plus years. But there's also still much more work to be done. So we'll definitely talk about that as well. But yeah, really appreciate being a part of this panel. That's me in a nutshell, and mahalo nui.
Mahalo nui, everyone. And I hope I didn't sound like a negative Nancy. Intro. But I'm grateful that you said you might sound like the optimist here, because I think we're all optimistic, right? That the fact that we're even having this conversation, I think, is really special and speaks to the change that we're seeing. So mahalo to all of you for your sharing your people and your places. So the next question that we have that we wanted y'all to address was, how have you seen the conversations about research on or with Indigenous communities? How have those conversations changed over time? Like, what do you see are the benefits and then also the harms in these changes? So I don't know who would like to go first. Just unmute yourself if you'd like. I don't want to feel like a teacher. Oh, yeah. Thank you.
No, I feel like I'm the elder in the room at this point. So I'll go first. Yeah, I've been reflecting on this question a lot, especially as I teach the Pono Science class. I know people are asking about what Pono Science is, and it's something that we're still trying to define. But Pono is when like a state of wellness is achieved between the land and the people. So you cannot achieve something good if just people benefit, but not the place that you're working in. And so it's kind of a thing that you have to put ethics at each part of the stage. So you need to start with situating yourself in a place of reciprocity, respect, and then mutual benefit and understanding goes with everyone involved in it. And I think the first time that I was really a part of any kind of conversation about that was back when I was an undergraduate. I think this was like 1998, 1999. I'm going to age myself here. But I went to a conference put together in Mississippi, and it was federal agencies trying to understand how do they increase diversity within the federal government. So it wasn't really an academic. There were forestry people there was fish and wildlife people, National Park Service is there, and they brought students who were of diverse background and say, well, how do we get you guys into these careers? How do we support you in your education? And as I look back at that conference, I can really see how those conversations have changed over time. At that point, they just wanted people who look like us in these places, right? They just wanted bodies sort of in the room. And they were trying to see, well, how do we diversify ourselves kind of at that base level? And not in a bad way. I always try to reflect. I mean, that was just the state of diversity at the time. It was just that they wanted more than just white males in the conversations. So it was just being a female was something that they were looking for, right? There's a huge push in sciences, in academia for females. And as you guys look around, we're pretty female dominated. And I say what most Indigenous communities that I work with in academia is mostly female dominated. So even that switch at the NSF level needs to happen, that we're not just trying to get more females in anymore. I think our female, especially with minority communities, the females are pretty strong and prevalent. And so the conversations shifted from bodies in there for inclusion of perspectives, right? And so we're seeing that shift happening through time of, okay, we need to include it more. And then now we need to integrate it, right? How do we integrate these worldviews? And there's a big push for that. And now there's a big pushback against that. And I'm one of those about, you can't really see the world through a different lens yourself. Other peoples can bring their different knowledges and ways to see the world to a similar place, but I can never assume to see the world as a male. I can't assume to see the world from someone who was born and raised in a landlocked state. Like, we just see the world very differently, and just acknowledging that and building from that. So that integration is someplace that I've seen the conversation go, but we need to get to the next level now. And that next level is to break down the power dynamics that happen when you bring people from different backgrounds and different communities together and really repatriate land back, all these different movements. I think people are just like, where is this coming from? But this conversation about doing research in communities has to be built on trust. And that trust has been degraded over time. And the only way to reverse that trust in the communities is to acknowledge the power dynamics that happen when you work with a community and who you are and who you're working with, the monies that you bring, right? All of those things change the dynamics. The fact that we're all speaking in English, right? We're going into a community with our language as the dominant language. Our research proposal is the dominant narrative of what we're going to accomplish, right? We might change it, right? We code speech all the time. We're going to justify what we're doing for different people all the time. But that conversation then has to kind of begin on common ground. And so I'm really happy to have seen these conversations over time. And I know we're in a place right now, I feel, of conflict, because we're at that place where we need to heal the distrust that's happened, because we're more than just having diversity in numbers or in bodies. And now we're into the diversity of solutions and the diversity of who's at the table. So yeah, I'm really happy to see where it's going, but I know we have a long way to go. I think I'll pass it off for other comments now too.
Yeah, I could follow. I'm just taking notes because I'm learning from you. I appreciate this conversation. It really aligns with what I was thinking about in preparation. But one thing also, I've been reading some of the work of Resmaa Menakem, who's a trauma therapist, primarily in Black African-American communities or formerly enslaved peoples, and has this concept of bodies of culture. And it really got me thinking about that shift, that push. There has been like so much push for minority representation or bodies of color, and really like making sure certain people are in the photos when the photos are taken. I've just been seeing that and experiencing that for years, but I really appreciate that you emphasize this shift to, I've been thinking from just, you know, bodies of color, just thinking about that surface, to bodies and minds of culture, and how those are, I like how you said, being, you know, brought in to then shape and innovate the solution. So yeah, I appreciate your recognition of that shift. It's helping me in my thinking too. And you know, when I thought about this question, I thought the main shift I've seen has been research on or for Indigenous peoples to research by and with. But I'm always in my teaching too, really pushing myself to not get stuck in this sort of, you know, small time frame that we tend to think within now, that is not a very Indigenous way of thinking, but that we get stuck in, especially in like natural resources and some of these fields that think on that time scale of maybe 1 or 2 human lifetimes. But that really this shift is such a small slice of time when we think about the extent of Indigenous research. You know, it has largely been by Indigenous peoples, by communities, community-led research. And I have to remember that, but in this very short period of time that's very much been shaped and is still, you know, happening, of extractive research and savior research, what I call savior research, it's so disproportionately represented in the body of written work that tends to dominate, you know, that tends to be the loudest in academia. And it's just heavily skewed towards this colonial gaze, like everything has been filtered and written through a colonial gaze. And so I think that it's still dominating the field. But what's happening, what's been so exciting has been just sort of like this trickling in of those Indigenous minds, Indigenous worldview and framework that's now like a wave coming. I see it like a wave. I see it in this talk. I see it with these new doctors, Sara and Diamond and so many others, and this incredible generation of students I'm now mentoring that are just so culturally grounded, so inspired, and they just get it. Even my kids, they're so young, but they are knowing things and thinking things I just couldn't even conceive at that age. So I see this wave coming in. Also, a lot of folks from all marginalized communities having access to higher education for the first time, seeing what has been written about us without us, and really disrupting those dominant narratives that have been heavily misconstrued, really harmful at times, super inaccurate data, super unscientific in the way they were formed too. So there's just this beautiful disruption happening and just this real shift. And I think as those bodies and minds of culture continue to come in this wave, we're going to see very large scale change in a relatively short amount of time. I feel like it, just from what I'm starting to see in the role I'm in now, I do see that change accelerating in a way that I'm super excited about. And I think in terms of, I don't know if I'd say harms, but a point of caution, I do want to just acknowledge that because the research, most of the research institutions, except for the Indigenous led and created ones, or intercultural ones as well, most of them have been completely structured around these settler colonial systems and agendas and the limitations of those, and really built on the erasure. I'm also at a land grant institution, or land grab institution, that is built on the dispossession of Indigenous peoples that in some places were displaced to an entirely different state outside of Colorado now. So the folks that are coming in, those bodies of mind and bodies of culture that are entering, whether they're Indigenous folks, like some of my maternal lineage from Africa that were enslaved and then forcibly brought here, other displaced Indigenous people, or Indigenous, you know, here to this part of the world too, they are forced to navigate through those systems in ways that can do a lot of harm. They can do, I know this firsthand, like they can do a lot of harm to your being, to your energy. It's it's really like a daily basis and coming at you from every direction in the curriculum, in the conversations you hear around campus, and the symbolism around campus, what's honored. And I mean, we have street names named after folks who justified genocide on these lands, still here today, and just constant reminders. So we have reminders of that beauty, that hope, and that change, but the other residue is still there. And it's very much still living in, you know, within colonization and all its harm. So I am concerned about the experiences that those bodies and minds of culture are having in these spaces. And I do see a need to protect them in a way and to look after them so they can do the work that they came to do and do the work that we really need right now too. So I'll pass the mic along.
Mahalo. As I mentioned, I feel like I kind of was able to step into a time and a place and a space that there was already conversations like these going on. There were already, you know, professors, all types of mentors, you know, with the mind to improve the situation for Indigenous people, whether or not they're Indigenous themselves. And I also sought those out. So I sought out spaces like, you know, Hawaiʻi School for Hawaiian Knowledge, different mentors, Kanaka Maoli mentors across departments to kind of guide me along the way, and found a lot of support there. So I think that nonetheless, over the, you know, since I was started an undergraduate 10 years ago, there have been changes. I think they've been not subtle, but you know, just gradual in terms of going from a space where there was some sort of discussion around increasing, you know, opportunities for, in my experience, mostly Native Hawaiian students, but also students of various ethnicities and marginalized groups. But those opportunities continue growing. The interest in uplifting those students and those academics continues growing. So I think there's a lot of good that's happening. And I think it's going from a place of, as Kumunoi was mentioning, like inclusion, or as we're all mentioning, like inclusion for the sake of inclusion and for the sake of like statistics or like whatnot, toward, you know, actual leadership and empowerment of those people at whatever level. And I think, you know, as you're mentioning, Dominique, it is, I do see the wave surging. There's a lot to be washed over, definitely, all across the land. There's so many remnants of colonialism and settlerism that's just very, very apparent throughout the system, throughout not only the academic system, but just our very existence in day-to-day life. But it is, I think, one example that I can share, and it's not a specific example, but just like I guess anecdote is like going from, I guess, small and superficial incorporation of you know, for example, cultural protocols, to like, you know, certain faculty and staff wanting to uplift Indigenous voices, and then realizing the extent of what cultural protocols can entail, and how, like, you know, just spiritually rooted it is, how long that it can take, you know, how involved these things are, and just like how beautiful it is to me, and I'm sure everyone here would agree, to witness like Indigenous voices being heard, and not only heard but felt at spaces such as conferences or like meetings and conference. And just like this morning, you know, it's becoming more and more routine in any sort of meeting to center it around cultural protocol, and not to just check it off as a box, but it's like, okay, let's feel it, you know, so I see that as like one example of how that wasn't necessarily apparent, or at least I wasn't maybe part of those groups at the time, but now more and more I see like these very powerful cultural protocols taking a precedent. So I see that as a benefit to like the genuine interest in Indigenous communities. And then the harm is like, I guess, tokenism, which, there can be like just this, I guess, constant desire or burden placed upon, whether it's that one Indigenous person in your department or, in your university that has to uplift this whole culture and this whole responsibility for the sake of making everybody else feel better about what they're trying to do anyway. So it's a give and take, but I think ultimately my feeling is that the wave is rising, and that it's building and it's exponentially growing, and that it wasn't going to be easy. And I think I feel good about the direction where things are going overall, but we still have to stay steadfast and reflective about, like, is this really benefiting us, or are we being used at all times? Mahalo.
Mahalo to all of you. Those answers all resonate so much with me. And, even as someone who's only been in this space for like a decade or so, well, I feel old now. Anyway, so we heard a lot from you folks about what it's like to, navigate these spaces as people who've come into academia. And we actually wanted to ask this question directly to Kawela, this next question. We wanted to ask if he could let us know what burdens he sees fall on community partners as calls for actionable research ramp up. As someone who works in the community partnership space, like, how do you see those folks being impacted by this increased drive to have Indigenous knowledge within academic settings and within federal research settings?
Yeah, I think, so my role as an extension agent is very fresh. So but it's something that I'm already starting to see. And then it also relates to the community-based work that I was doing before, although it wasn't like research heavy. But I think the number one burden is just time. People's time is precious. People in general, but especially, Indigenous and minoritized people, like, have just so many different burdens placed upon them, and family responsibilities, community responsibilities. And to be asked to participate in these research projects can be really exciting, because it's like, oh, wow, we're going to get some sort of help, or we're going to get some sort of collaboration, to address some sort of problem. But it can also be very time consuming, as we all know. So I think it's just making sure that the research that people are being asked to participate in is actually going to benefit them in the long run, that it's not diluting or taking away from their time, because oftentimes, within these Indigenous communities, there's like a relatively small cohort of like leaders that like takes on the burden of like representing others, and not always, there can be this, in my experience, there's like relatively small people who step up to the plate to like represent the community, whether that's their given kuleana, or that's their, I guess it's inherent kuleana that they take on because of their, personality traits and whatnot. But even more so for that small set of people that, is usually interfacing with researchers, government, proposals that come through, it can be really straining. So within my extension agent role, I've kind of, and because I'm working most directly within the community that I was born and raised in, I can kind of be that first level, community informant or community kind of liaison, that can provide some degree of like community background to researchers. And I can also try to vet, whether I feel people's, who I want to send this researcher to within the community, and whether they're at the point that it's appropriate to like utilize this person's time. So I think that's a valuable position to have, safeguards within the system to like basically protect people's time and the resources of the community. And then, because even worse yet is like when you initiate a process and then people are put into situations where they're asked to like share sensitive knowledge and things, and that can get even worse. So I think, like I'd say, number one is just time of day. Number two is like sensitive information, and I don't know too much about scenarios where there's been like monetary, I guess, investment on the part of the community, but I could definitely see that too. But I think I feel fortunate to be in a role where I can kind of broker those relationships, and I look forward to continuing to do that over time, because even in the short time, like I've been involved with, this an interdisciplinary grant with various researchers, and I love everybody who's involved with that. But just seeing the amount of work that can fall upon trying to coordinate, a complex research process, especially one involving multiple faculty members, like it's a lot. So I would really not wish that upon the community. And I think that the university system just needs to, and even the researchers themselves need to acknowledge the amount of work that's involved and just kind of plan for that and not put that burden on the community. So.
Mahalo nui for that response. When you were talking about, the time versus money, time is money, right? Like our time is precious. We're only here for so long. Okay, so the next question then is for Dominique, maybe just Dominique. We'll see how long it takes. But what changes do you think need to be made to the process of research to diminish these burdens and then generate greater benefits for Indigenous peoples? And I appreciate that a lot of our conversation is also centered a lot on students as well. So, again, what changes need to be made to the process of research to diminish the burdens and then generate greater benefit for Indigenous peoples?
Yeah, I appreciate this question. I also am an optimist, so I like focusing on the solutions and problem solving. But I think I'm thinking a lot about what Kawela said, and I'm really valuing the role that you've taken and that you have that built-in accountability to community because it's your community, to, I guess, like you said, serve as that relationship broker. It's got me thinking a lot about that, because I think when that's not in place, like maybe we need to formalize protocols around. A lot of times when proposals are reviewed, for example, they may be looking for certain types of scientific expertise and certain types of professional expertise to say, does this team have the capacity to lead this project? And I think something is happening when it comes to relational experience with Indigenous communities that's missing, that's not being accounted for, and whether or not teams hold the capacity to do that research in a good way and to have some of that baseline foundational understanding and experience. So I do think we need systems, roles in some cases, but systems that build that in, because otherwise the burden is falling on the community, right? To educate sometimes the entire research team of History 101 from a non-settler narrative, what the local governance systems are, what the customary protocols are. And that's a lot of work to have that education and to get people up there. So, but if there were systems in place where that is embedded in our foundational education, whether it's ethics trainings, like I would love to see those as part of the ethics trainings in our courses for folks that are doing research. Like, this is the foundational understanding we all need to have. We need to know how we're going to uphold inherent rights and responsibilities. Those are also our responsibilities as citizens of nations that have signed on to the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, which I think our universities and institutions completely overlook those obligations and responsibilities. But building them into our training from like the earliest phase we can think of onward, that foundation of ethics, and then building them into system, like having actual mechanisms and systems, for example, in the IRB or the Institutional Review Board ethical review process, that flag research, that where people need to have those understandings around protocol in place, and offer some of that work in lieu of the community, or pay community members if they're going to be educating and giving their time and energy. Ooh, like people, I know now university researchers and staff can get paid a good chunk of money to be managing a project, and community members are getting sometimes an honoraria. There are students who, this is the thing that needs to change. People need to stop telling students that there are opportunities for them, like they're offering that student something, when really whether by intention or not. And I've seen both. I've seen people intentionally do this exploitative stuff, and people do it without intentional, but just kind of defaulting to tokenism, using those marginalized or community members or folks or students in many cases to access Indigenous communities and knowledges for just the benefit of the researchers or institution. I see that all the time. And I think one of the ways we can shift that is to make sure we're really clear that these are authoritative roles, that folks on the team have really showed the credentials and capacity. And I think one other point along those lines is that we're recognizing different forms of credentials and different forms of knowledge and expertise that academia, they say, oh, PI has to have PhD or whatnot. They have those credentials, but some folks may be really lacking in the credentials they need, street cred, community cred, mechanisms for accountability that have degrees. And there may be community knowledge keepers that are getting just barely paid and offering a great deal, generations of wisdom and expertise that is actually guiding the project in very critical ways, guiding research in very critical ways. I think building in, balancing that out through reciprocity, whether that's funding or really solid on the ground support for community efforts that are already taking place. Those are some solutions, and I got so many others, but I don't want to take too much time. People can talk later, and I'll share a link to our lab if people want to keep in touch.
Yeah, thanks, Dominique. Kumonoi, do you want to answer this question too? So the question again, what changes need to be made to the process of research to diminish burdens and then generate greater benefits for Indigenous peoples?
Yeah, there's so much that resonated with what Dominique was sharing. Thank you. And I'm looking forward to hearing the rest of what you want to share too. So I hope we have time for that. I think you touched a lot on it. Like the ethics is a big part, I think, of why I started the Pono Science course. It was to take that conversation of ethics deeper into what does it mean to have relationships with communities, and what does it mean to do science with the community. And for Pono was referencing the Hawaiian community, but how do we do science in Hawaii? What I've seen happen over the years is that we're raising students, and just because of all the movements that are happening around us, that are aware of the power dynamics, of the struggles, of land back, right? This is a big part of the students' literature and training, but not in their mentors, right? So that higher PhD level, the faculty, the full professors, the people who are running big research institutions, they aren't talking the same vernacular. They're not being raised in the same environment, right? It's this next generation, like you said, that gives us hope. They're speaking these words and pushing for these movements. And that's the hard part when it comes to research, is they're not the ones writing the grants. They're not the ones that are, designing the research. As you said, they're the ones who are getting the burden of, hey, can you go and do this now? Or we have this opportunity for you to work in your community. And they have to create those relationships. And so that action of effort has to be at the institution side and not just on the research side. And that's also something that the funding agencies, I think, are quicker to change than the institutions that are doing the research, because the funders change their RFPs all the time. They added in broader impacts. They added in the ethical sections. They added in all these things over the years, but the faculty in these positions are still doing the same type of research and just tweaking the research itself, and now just trying to change the language they use. And it's just a different environment today than it was 20, 30 years ago in research. And so the institutions, academic, federal agencies, it is something that is hard for them to shift. And the DEI initiatives that a lot of these federal agencies are doing, are trying to help with that. But it just means that we need to spend more time in this place, that facilitators are necessary, and they shouldn't be the students. They shouldn't be the graduate students, and they shouldn't be the undergraduates. They should be funded positions. Community members, like you said, just giving them an honorarium isn't acknowledging all the time, and relationships that they're putting on the line to be a part of these research efforts. And it also sometimes reprioritizes what the community does. They might really have an agenda doing this, but they're spending all this time helping you on these research questions. And so it's reprioritizing what they need to do for their community, which isn't very helpful for everyone involved. I think the other thing that is, I think I'm only saying this because of my position, but I feel like research can really be shifted as we support more faculty in the Indigenous studies departments. And so we expect all our students to be raised in their multiple worldviews and bring them with them. But a lot of them found their inspiration, right, in faculty and other disciplines, not just in science and research. And these faculty are being called upon to be helping in these different institutions because of their culture knowledge, because they're acknowledged for what they bring to the table. And so I think research departments can help their overall research by advocating for more people within Indigenous studies program, within ethnic studies program, and not just always expecting to hire faculty in their department that's going to bring these two different worldviews together. A lot of people don't want that pressure. That might not be what their research is in, but because they are Indigenous and because they've worked in water, you're going to create these spaces for them to go. And so I think shifting that, always having the burden on scientists of Indigenous background or scientists of color to pull it all on top, we can really understand that's the place of ethnic studies programs. That's the place of people in the history department. They've understood the history of science. They understand the philosophy of science and how it's changed through time. And us as physical or earth scientists, we don't have those backgrounds. And that's where I really have a hard time with the burden being placed on students, is that they don't understand a lot of the political and social history that is at the root of all of these causes. And they're just here now. And they're just wanting to do that with really not understanding, no, you shouldn't be doing this. This is not your role. This is not your job. But they don't know they're not supposed to be doing that. And that they shouldn't be, and they can if they want to, but they really have to bring that background with them. And so changing research to support communities starts at all levels of the institution, and not just in the sciences. Yeah, I think I can go on forever like Dominique, so I think I'm going to pause there.
Mahalo kumu and kumu Dominique. I really hope that we can continue to hear some of your thoughts after in the Q&A, because you're just dropping so much information that's so useful. Okay, so before we transition into the questions from the audience, we wanted to ask one final question of all of our panelists. So what message would you want to convey to those that have the power to make decisions about research funding in light of our discussion today? Whoever wants to go first, feel free to start.
I'm going to pass it off because I think I just stated some of my things at the end of mine, and so I'll wait. Nick, I think Kawela's ready.
So I'll go. Yeah, I think it's all been said. I think we just need to, as was mentioned, we have an awesome platform with the Kulana Noi'i here in Hawaii, the standards of research. There's a document that was, I believe, shared in the chat. So we have this, and we just need to make the best use of it as we can, disseminate it to as many different researchers, make it a formal part of the research proposal process as criteria alongside other forms of merit. I think that's one of the first and foremost things that we can do. And I'll just leave it at that so I don't take other people's potential things. But I think that's a really important thing that we should continue to strive for.
Yeah, and I would just add that folks think on an Indigenous or intergenerational timescale in terms of broader impacts. And that investment in seed funding, investment in time to build relationships if they're not already in place, and to build trust, which may require reconciliation and addressing and halting ongoing or past harms in those communities too. Those investments are super important, and they really have to happen prior to or as part of, embedded in that process of determining when folks are, like Kawela said, when and if folks are actually ready to make those connections and do the work. So that seed funding, flexible and adaptive timelines, all of those modifications to the funding structures that can allow for intergenerational broader impacts in that thinking. And also to share that consent is an ongoing process. It's not a one-time thing. And I think that needs to be known by funding agencies and folks that are reviewing, and that there are just to question how the funding structure, how are inherent rights and responsibilities reflected in your systems for funding. So get to know UNDRIP, get to know those histories, get to know those inherent rights and responsibilities. Communities are holding up, even when they're challenged to do so, they're still holding them up. And then look at how you can embed Indigenous research and data governance and community-led, not just co-production or co-governance, co-management, but community-led. If it's Indigenous research or community research that is really led by those folks, how can that be embedded, not in every stage, in investing in community-led design and the proposal, generating the questions. Sometimes that it's like things are being developed and then folks are being brought in. So how can the funding, maybe through seed funding is one avenue, support that, really building that in. And then there are examples. So look at funding structures that are already taking the steps. For example, the Climate Adaptation Science Centers, USGS Science Centers are now including the CARE principles for Indigenous data governance in their request for funding proposals. So I do see some examples coming out, and I can share a link to the CARE principles in the chat for folks, but look at examples where folks are starting to lead the way and learn from each other across these different funding institutions and funding structures to be brave, to make the changes. Yeah.
Mahalo nui. And I know Dominique and I had a conversation about this, I think, at the last Rising Voices meeting, but like, why can't we pay for food? Like, what is so hard about this? So if anyone is here from a funding agency, let us buy food, please. Okay, so now we're gonna move into the Q&A. So if you have any questions that you'd like to ask, please drop them in the Q&A. You can find that at the bottom bar of the Zoom screen. The first question, I think, can all of our panelists can see the question too, right? But I'm going to ask this question from Stephanie, and I'm going to read it out because I think it's a beautiful statement. So Stephanie said, I have found that with this push for diverse bodies and presence of diversity, we're facing a big challenge of meeting or engagement fatigue because we're still using the same Western value engagement methods. So how do we convince our leadership to leave behind these savior methodologies and give us time and support to do these engagements more thoughtfully? Anyone feel strongly to answer that?
Thanks, Stephanie. I think that is a great statement. It's something that when I was going to talk about, like, how do we ask people for help? Like, what is it that they can do to support us? And it's that institutionalization, yeah, of these roles. Because you're right, it falls on the same people all the time and the same engagement methods. So we need to also shift to create training and acknowledgement of these efforts, right? How do we change the acknowledgement that, yes, I did this research project, but my research project involved 30 people versus his research project that involves 3 PIs and 2 undergraduate students. That's why they're productive in 6 months. Mine takes 30 people, 20 students, and we've spent time in place. And so my productivity might seem less, but I had more engagement with people, right? And so trying to acknowledge those differences, I think is really impactful. And also, as we write projects and budgets, we need reviewers to be a little bit more skeptical about things. And you're saying, wait, you're going to involve all these people, yet you don't have anyone here who's going to facilitate that conversation. Who do you see facilitating this conversation? Do you have someone allocated for that time? My half month of summer salary overload isn't going to let me do the research and facilitate the conversations. So yeah, great things to think about.
just word to everything you shared, because it really hit me deep. We have to share these stories. Sometimes we're having these experiences and we may gaslight ourselves and feel isolated. But the more I hear, it's very systemic. And then I think, oh, we can address this collectively because we're collectively experiencing this. But yeah, you brought me some things I'd like to take home to my faculty and all that too, because it's also like being in place, being in community, and giving community time to review what we're making, what we're producing before it's published. That all takes time, especially if you're doing it respectfully, respecting people's time. I really value what you shared. And I think the thing I might add is protocol. When this is happening because we don't have protocol in place, and we need to create protocol around this. And I appreciate this question. So thank you for posing this question. In place, like, since we don't have it here, we're in the process now of developing it reactively at our institution, which is sometimes you have to leverage, the bad things that happen, the crises, to do good, to shift into, addressing those. But there are examples, and I've really valued Max Liberon's work at the Clear Lab, which I can share in the chat, and their work with Memorial University and with tribal nations and communities, where that university sits to develop protocol. Because I think when protocol's in place, we're not having to do it on the spot and have that fatigue and that burnout from, like you said, Noe, like facilitating and doing our research skills and, keeping those relationships with community, spending time with community, and taking care of our kids and our family and all the students who come to us, because sometimes we're only a handful of people who understand and relate to their experiences like that. The burnout is real, the fatigue is real. But when institutions have protocol in place and they say, these are our norms for respectful engagement and respectful collaboration, and here are your required readings, and here is your required training, and this is how you go about that work. I think I haven't experienced that, but I see the example of it. And I think building that protocol is definitely one of the ways we can shift from that kind of default savior research that's been taking place.
Awesome. Mahalo so much. I think the next question maybe Kawela could answer if he feels up to it. Arlo Davis says that they keep finding words in their language don't translate to English. And how have you been successful with translation work for the stuff that doesn't translate?
Yeah, I wouldn't consider I have a fluency in Olelo, but yeah, I did translation work for my master's capstone. I would just say you'd have to just find the best method of explaining it. Maybe putting a footnote to like put a more like elongated like explanation of all the potential meanings, because those layered meanings are very important. In Hawaii, it's called kauna, or the many different layers of meaning. So I always love to look into the kauna of things, and I don't want to, sometimes it's also advantageous to not share all of the meanings and let that kauna stay as it is and share the surface meaning to the public, and have those layered meanings be something special for those who will understand. But also if there's an important reason to share those meanings, then yeah, just taking the time to maybe not necessarily translate word for word, but to translate in a way that thoroughly describes like all of the potential meanings of what is trying to be said.
Awesome, mahalo. Cool. No, do you actually have some thoughts on that too? Because I feel like your Pono science course maybe speaks a bit to what it means to do that work of like, I don't know, I kind of hate this term, but walking in two worlds, or doing that translation between multiple knowledge systems.
Yeah, that's why I responded a little bit to him in the chat, because it's come up a lot in this. It's a K-8 science curriculum that we're creating around coastal change. And they wanted it to be in two worldviews, and they have a glossary that explains it. And to me, the glossary is just, it's not problematic, but it kind of squashes that idea that we see things differently. So the different worldviews are hard to see when you think that you can just define it using English for everything. And so it's really interesting to try and get to that deeper place. Like, how do we're not just translating a word, we're translating a concept. And I think if we just kind of move to that, to understand well, to explain this, I need to show you my worldview instead of, yes, this is how my word translates in the English language. Without that worldview, you're kind of lost. And so, yeah, really getting, like Kawela was saying, to that kauna behind it is just kind of giving a little perspective into this new worldview. And I think that's really important that we use these new worldviews to expand what we see and how we interact.
Mahalo. And I guess, Dominique, do you have thoughts on that from a continental perspective? Or I guess island, but different side of the continent.
I mean, I just resonate with what's shared. I think that there's so many layers to meaning in the language. I like that the emphasis is on concepts, because I think, like, the more I've engaged with my own Indigenous language, the more understanding I have that I couldn't have through just engaging in English. So yeah, just to reaffirm that engaging in the worldview, and sometimes being in that place, it has been like being on the land or being in place has been the only way I really understood the language, or in some cases the imagery or the symbolism also is another area where I've experienced that. So and being patient with translation. I think being patient is really important for the shift that we need to make too, that things take time. Things take time to learn and listen to and explain. And sometimes you have to do it through experience. So yeah, maybe that's all I have to add.
Mahalo nui. We have another question from Annie Rosa. Hi, Annie. So Annie asked, how do you envision universities shifting land and power dynamics to serve Indigenous learners and communities? And noise is muted, so.
Oh, sorry, forgot to mute again. Thanks, Annie. That is a great question. One thing that I know that is super hard, I think, working in the university is just the financial processes are really hard. There's a lot of burden on that. And so to shift that away, if the universities could fund directly into community groups and not have to go through PIs all the time, I think that's something else. You know, as we bring in people into the university structure that aren't holding faculty positions and giving them you know, that facilitation role. I think that is something that they're trying to do. And I think it's, you know, it's going to be slowly working. I think that, like you said, it's really hard to train full professors. It's really hard to train people who worked in the university for a long time. But if the institution really does want to make this shift, they really have to figure out and change some of those structures, change some of those demands that they have on faculty to create a more of a equal playing field in that sense. As Dominique was saying, there's just so much extra burdens on faculty of Indigenous backgrounds, of faculty who are working in these realms. And that's where the push for science is going. And is that where the university is supporting? Yeah, I'm sure there's lots of other things. Dominique, you want to add on as we finish with this?
Yeah, I wanted to share something exciting that's happening here at our land grant institution, Colorado State University. Is well, one, we have a new VP of Indigenous and Native American Affairs. So it's a high level position working with the president, but this is the focus of what they do, Patricia team. So, but the other thing that recently came out, there was really kind of a collective grassroots effort of Indigenous faculty and students and community and staff here that brought this together over time. Was there's going to be a reinvestment of revenue from those land grant sales and all the ways that they're leasing and, you know, making money on dispossessed Indigenous lands, reinvestment for Indigenous learners and communities. So I don't know what that's looking like, but I'm very curious to see if this is an example that could also be, you know, taken up at other land grant institutions as one of the ways to shift those power dynamics, to invest that dirty money and make it good again. So yeah, I just wanted to share that and something to pay attention to in the days ahead.
I can just jump in real quick because this is really what I guess we're trying to envision with Waiale'e. You know, Waiale'e is owned by the it's a portion of the University of Hawaii's land grant holdings, was used as an experiment station for a long time, was neglected, and kind of fell into disuse. And now there's this kind of shared vision amongst the community and various faculty members and students to bring this place back into sustainable management, which really emphasizes the traditional indigenous resource management systems such as loko'i'a, traditional Hawaiian fish ponds, lo'ikalo, traditional Hawaiian taro patches, all of which agroforestry, all of which integrated with the native plants and animals that were found in that area. So and trying to involve the community along every step of the way. We, as I alluded to, we have a grant that's bringing in interdisciplinary faculty to work on various aspects of the property and kind of start to envision the future of this place. So I think it starts at the community level and the faculty level. It's slower to move within the administrative level, but if you can engage, as we've started to engage community partners and individual faculty members who have that interest and the desire to do what is right, then I think it's going to trickle up basically and make a broader change. And many of the lands that are owned by the University of Hawaii are underutilized and could have similar potential to be, I guess, re-envisioned by the respective communities that surround them. So I look forward to that.
Mahalo. That was great. So the very last question we'll ask of you before we close, if you can do this in one sentence or one word, that would be great. But for all of you, can you share one thought or piece of advice for the students who are here in this call, for those who are, just starting their research careers? We'll go with our Noi first.
I was just trying to write this in the chat to MJ, who wrote a question about aquaculture. And, now that he's here, how does he do it? But I think it's also relevant for students. And it's to know your language. Really try to understand either your own cultural background language or maybe the place that you're studying and research in. But once you start learning that language, you'll start shifting and understanding their worldview a little bit more and really connecting to place. And if you know the places that you're from and the language that are being used, it'll just give you that confidence to do whatever research you want to do.
Yeah, that echoes what I was going to say too, which is just care for and feed, those relationships and connections you have to community mentors, and to the land, to the culture. Those are going to feed you and sustain you and offer insights to you to guide you in ways that you won't find outside of communities. So make sure you're feeding and taking time for those relationships.
To build on the same thing in a slightly different way and also address those who feel concerned as settlers. I think it just let your research really be guided by something that you're really deeply invested in and passionate about. And maybe there's some sort of personal relationship there that's going to guide you, and then you invest in that place. And it's not just something that's fleeting or following a funding cycle, but it's just something that's really deep to your core as a person. And that's probably how you'll begin to feel, closer to that Indigenous community and more a part of it rather than, outside of it. And that applies for all levels, from people starting out to people already deep into their careers.
Yeah. Mahalo nui. Katie, do you want to share the slides again? But as Katie's doing that, that part of that conversation, I think there's an olelo noeau that says ho'okahi no lau kamalahini, which is a stranger only for a day, right? And I think that speaks well to what all three of our panelists just said. So mahalo to all of our panelists, all of our dear friends who took their time to join us today, and for all of you who are in the audience for caring and wanting to be a part of this conversation. I know we didn't get to all the questions, but I hope that this is fostering more conversation beyond this 1.5 hours that we've spent together. So let's keep this conversation going. I think this webinar will be hosted on the Sea Grant YouTube page or YouTube channel. I don't I'm not from this generation, YouTube thing. And then we also have a survey that someone will put in the chat. If you could fill out this survey for us, that would be really helpful. So yeah, mahalo for joining. And I think, if any of our panelists want to share their contact info, please do so. Because yeah, we're all ohana now. So yeah, mahalo nui and have a good rest of your day.